Hello everyone, how you doing? Welcome back to Transformation Tuesday. Greetings again from beautiful Bali. Tonight's episode is how do you deal with a crisis when life just dishes up just absolute crap to you, when things get tough, when life really gives you some of the biggest challenges that you've ever faced. How do you deal with that? So tonight's episode is how to deal with a crisis. How do you deal with life when it just doesn't really comply with everything that you're wanting, with your desiring? And that's going to happen. This is one of the things that happens in our life, is it doesn't always give us what we want. In fact, some of the best experiences you're going to ever go through in terms of growth experiences that are going to expand you and elevate your level of empowerment and competency and skill are going to be in these dark moments that we label as a crisis. And the thing about a crisis is that it's laced and layered with opportunity. Hey Mike, good to have you here. Crisis is an incredibly beautiful, empowering opportunity to grow and to expand. And so we need to recognize that, yes, we need to be able to deal with crises, but also starting to understand how we can see a crisis as a catalyst for a really empowering new element of growth. So I'm going to be covering with you, how do you turn a crisis into an opportunity? How do you grow? How do you bounce back? How do you become resilient? How do you manage it? In that moment of extreme emotional pressure, how do you handle yourself? What do you do? How do you stay centered? How do you stay grounded? How do you make sure you don't make any rash decisions? How do you make sure that you stay composed and operate from the highest level of intelligence that you possibly can, even when it feels like your world is about to end? So I'm going to share with you some of the tools and strategies that I share with my clients, and I've had quite a few conversations with clients this week of shit going down. And that's one of the great things that I love about being a coach, is being able to support my clients in their moments, in their darkest moments. And so this episode tonight is about the top strategies and mindset hacks around how to handle a crisis. So let's get straight into it. The first element that we really need to appreciate about crises is that they are growth experiences. They really are an opportunity for us to evolve and expand. So that's the first element, is recognize that you will experience a crisis in your life from time to time. I'm sure many of you have already experienced crises. For those that are watching, I'd love to know if you've experienced a crisis before. If so, if some crisis has happened relatively recently for you, something that might have thrown you off guard, something that might caught you off guard, and something that might have impacted you. Now, this happens in life. This is a very normal experience. Now, what is a crisis? Well, a crisis is simply an experience that unfolds that is so extreme in terms of it being unfamiliar or new or challenging that we don't really know what to do about it. It's a situation that's not familiar, and as a result, we have a lack of awareness and a lack of understanding on how to handle that, how to deal with it, because it's the things that you already know that you're good with. The things that you already have an understanding of, well, that will never present a crisis because it's just the thing that you do. A crisis is only a crisis when you don't understand yourself enough to manage yourself, to trust yourself, to handle the situation, because it's new, it's unfamiliar, it's an extreme situation that's beyond your level of skill, knowledge, experience, or competency. So the first thing to do is recognize that if you are experiencing what we're calling a crisis, great. You're about to have a growth experience. You're about to expand. You're about to discover how to handle yourself in unfamiliar territory, how to move beyond the existing challenges that you've experienced. And you now are starting to move into new territory, new levels of challenge. So see it as an expansionary process, as a natural process. If you're not experiencing any crises, if you're not experiencing any growth, well, it means that you are staying safe. It means you are not expanding. It means you're not putting yourself in any new situations. Now, how you handle yourself in a crisis, this is where there's some skill, there's an art, there's a science, there's a methodology, and this is what I'm sharing with you tonight. Is the core part of this message really comes down to recognizing that our perception as a human is governing whether we see this as a gift, as a blessing, as an expansionary process, or are we seeing this as something wrong, something that shouldn't be happening, something that's invalid? So first of all, recognize that a lot of people will look at a crisis and straight away the default perspective is something's wrong, this isn't right. And what can get created from the get-go is this unconscious reaction straight away that something's not right and that this is to be avoided, this is terrible, this is horrible. So what's playing out here is judgment of the situation. Judgment of the situation. That's fundamentally what a crisis is. In order for a crisis to be a crisis, it's judgment. Now what I'm going to offer is a reframe. And I'm going to offer that we reframe a crisis as a learning opportunity, as an expansionary process that's going to be a catalyst for us creating a far more empowered, newer version of the self. Work restructure a crisis. Nice one, Shemaine. Yeah. Work restructuring. For a lot of people, that could be considered a crisis. Now, you might see if your work is being restructured in the sense of my job is at stake. Maybe things are going to be shaken up. Maybe my job is not going to be as good as before. Maybe things are going to get worse. Or you could see this as, great, things are going to get tightened up. Things are going to improve. This is an opportunity to expand, to evolve, to elevate, for us to all be more competent. Maybe if the job ends, if you get made redundant, maybe if your job finishes, great, new opportunity. Blank canvas to create something new, something more empowering. So again, you might look at a work restructure as something like a crisis, or you might see it as an opportunity. So again, the word I'm using here, crisis, I invite you all to see this more positively instead of something negatively. So the key to this is awareness. Start to recognize that what's coming into your awareness is simply information. So when a crisis is going down, now this might be you lost your job, you've gone bankrupt, your partner's left you, maybe someone close to you has just been diagnosed as being terminally ill. There's a whole lot of different examples that we might label as a crisis. Now, this is simply information that's entering your awareness. Thoughts are just simply information. When you're holding a thought inside your awareness, that is information. It's frequency, it's energy. It's simply a vibration that carries with it a signature, which we're labeling here as information. Now, you can either be in reaction to that information, you can either be judging that information, or you can simply be in acceptance with the information. So at the highest level of consciousness, what you're going to see here is that if we are experiencing judgment, if we're experiencing resistance, all that's happening is that we are in resistance, we are in judgment of a thought. We are in judgment of information. We are deciding that information is not good, we're wanting to avoid it, we don't like it, we think it's good, we think it's ugly, it's not good, it's something to be avoided, it's something that's not valid. Hey Fatima, good to see you here. So what we really need to be aware of is that is simply information. Now that information is coming into our awareness. Now if you're in resistance to that information, i.e. if you're judging that information, if you're labeling it, if you have negative associations to that information, well, we're going to perceive this as something that's not right, as something that's not good. Now in reality, there is no such thing as good, bad, right or wrong. There is just simply information. And it is only through the human condition, the human experience, that we create a distinction of something being good and bad. Now, you could look at something as for example, I'll give you the best example is the word challenge. You could call something a problem or you could call something a challenge. Just by labeling something, you've reframed it. Just by labeling this concept, we're able to alleviate a lot of suffering because of the triggers and the emotional trauma and the information that gets brought back to our awareness when we use language is profound. So if you're using language like problem versus challenge, crisis or opportunity, then this is going to significantly affect your interpretation of your reality. And this is where you can start hacking your reality to bits when we start identifying more of these processes. So one of the ways you can start to override the negativity of our reaction to this information is starting to recognize if we're in resistance to this information. Now, say, for example, if you've lost your job, you might now start to have thoughts of, oh, how am I going to find another one? That was a great job. I'm going to lose money. How's this going to work? There's all this information that comes into your awareness, all these concerns, all these thoughts. Now, some of those thoughts are valid bits of information. Like if you've just lost your job or if you've just been made redundant, there's going to be some valuable information that's going to be coming through your awareness to pay attention to. So some of that information is to be attended to. It's to take responsibility for that information. Some of that information just might be fear. Some of that information might be hallucination. Some of that might be crazy thinking. It's not based on any rational, logical thought process. It's just an instinctive, reactive program that's been conditioned maybe from something that happened in your past. So this is where you've now got to start filtering your thinking, filtering your awareness, and start to recognize of those thoughts inside your awareness, what is valid, what should you pay attention to. And in the case of maybe being given a redundancy, if you're having thoughts of how am I going to pay the bills, well, maybe that's a valid thought to be having. Gee, I need to start taking some precautions to make sure my finances are taken care of, or my family are making sure the security and my mortgage is paid and all those sorts of things. So that can be valid information. Alternatively, it might be an overreaction, in which case, if it's an overreaction, well, you're potentially just hallucinating and worrying about stuff that isn't there to need to be worried about. So this is where we need to pay attention to the information that's coming through our awareness. And we need to sift through it. There will be some gold in there, like panning for gold. There will be some gold inside your experience. There will also just be some lumps of rock or fool's gold. So recognize that the information that's passing through your consciousness, that's gold. And you've got to sift for the gold and you've got to identify it. Now, a really powerful thing that helps this process is being grateful in those moments of challenge, in those moments of crisis. Being grateful that you can actually have an awareness. So you've probably heard of this. Gratitude is the antidote to fear. Gratitude is the antidote to a lot of different things. Gratitude, which is being thankful for the awareness, thankful for that information, is a way of collapsing the suffering. What do I mean? Well, if you just had a thought, say you've just been made redundant, and you're now having a thought, gee, how am I going to pay my mortgage? Gee, how am I going to support my family? How am I going to pay for all these things? How am I going to get a new job? Well, you can say, great, thank you. That's all good information. Great. I'm going to write this down. This is good information. This is gold. This is actually information that can actually help me. So you can actually be present and aware and grateful in that moment for the awareness. So you're now flipping it. You're actually saying, great, I'm actually glad that I'm actually have the ability to observe this information because it's helpful. If I couldn't observe this, if I couldn't discern this, then I'd be flying blind and I'd be very, very disempowered. So that's the first hack, is to flip it and say, I'm grateful that I'm having this awareness because there's some gold in this. Even though it might be uncomfortable to deal with, even there might be some inconvenient truths that I need to take responsibility for, I am now going to actually have gratitude for the presence and the awareness of the information. So that's the first step, which kind of flips this whole process on its end. That, combined with seeing this as a growth experience, as difficult and as challenging as it might be in the moment, we need to have this awareness. We need to have these frames of awareness to realize that, okay, by starting to view this experience through a different series of filters, we are starting to override and collapse the natural human response, which is a fear-based response. The natural default human program is the ego. And the ego, when unobserved, it will rule your life. It will run your life. And fear will make your decisions for you. Fear will be driving your bus, and you won't even be aware of it because you'll be in a low state, a low mood, or a low level of awareness. So that's the first element to realize, is this is all about starting to become aware of the ego, starting to be aware of the fear. Once you can become aware of something, you can transcend it. You can override it. You can move beyond it. And so this is strength training. This is conditioning. And it gets your ability to handle a crisis. Ability to handle that crisis will continue to keep increasing the more and more that you go through them. So eventually, once you've been through enough crises, it's no longer a crisis. It's just life. So just realize, if you feel like you're going through a crisis, realize you just need to go through it. And then once you've gone through it, it just becomes a thing that you dealt with. And then you have an awareness and understanding of how to deal with that. And then all of a sudden you can then look back and go, yeah, well, if I was to go through that again, well, maybe it might not necessarily be desirable or easy, but I know how to deal with it. So realize that if we are in a crisis and if we're in a state of uncertainty, if we're in a state of fear, the reason that we're in that state is because we lack a level of understanding of self or the situation to be able to know how to handle it, to know what decisions to make, to be able to trust ourselves. And after we've been through a crisis, well, you now evolve, you've now grown, you've expanded. So see this as a gift. See any crisis as a gift of opportunity, of expanding to become a greater, more empowered version of self. Another hack that's really good from a physiological point of view to deal with a crisis is, as simple as it sounds, breathe. What do I mean by breathe? I mean, a lot of times when we're in a state of fear or anxiety, the breathing patterns that we're actually doing unconsciously are very, very shallow. And so when you start to take nice, big, deep breaths in, and a nice, big, slow breath out, what it does is it actually shuts down your fight or flight response. So if you take a nice, big, deep breath in, now the way to do this is you just take a nice, big, deep breath in, and then the key thing here is to make sure your exhale is as long as you possibly can. And it's a nice, slow, controlled out breath. Like that. And that will shut down the fight or flight response. That will start to relax you. So you can use some physiological factors like breathing here to your advantage that starts to calm you down. Once you've done that for a period of time, that might be a minute, 2 minutes, depending on the severity of the crisis, you now start to calm down a little bit. Now, I recommend stay aware of your breathing. As soon as you lose consciousness, as soon as you lose the awareness of your breath, well, you start to go into the mind. You start to now go into, what am I going to do? How am I going to handle this? Your mind will start to become frantic. Whereas if you start just breathing and focusing on your breath, you calm yourself down. Kind of like meditation. For those of you that are aware of or regular meditators, you'll know that the skill of meditation is one of these powerful mindset training tools that helps us become more resilient, helps us become more aware of our thinking, and lets us become more peaceful. So what we now will start to become aware of is the resistance to the information that's in our consciousness. Now, depending on the crisis, there's some information that you are not going to want to take responsibility for. There's going to be some things that you've got to take responsibility for, some things you might have to do, some things you might have to stretch yourself, you might have to take some bold action, you might have to be seriously disadvantaged or inconvenienced in that moment. And so there might be some situations and some elements that are now starting to present themselves that you don't particularly like, that you may be in judgment of. So start to be aware of where you're in resistance. Start to be aware of what about your experience you're in resistance to. So this is getting specific. Instead of just saying, oh, this is terrible, or I'm in a crisis, this is horrible, say, well, what specifically about this am I in resistance to? Is it the consequence? Is it what people are going to think of me? Is it what I'm going to think of myself? Am I embarrassed? Am I in shock? Am I going to be in a sense of shame or guilt? Is this something I'm going to feel sad about? So start to realize what's the emotion that's pouring through in that moment. So really this comes down to emotional intelligence. This is in that moment when you are challenged, in your darkest moment. It's having the presence and the peace of mind, the presence of mind rather, to discern what is the emotion you're experiencing. Now, it's through the contemplation of what emotion am I experiencing that you're able to escape what I call the suffer cycle, because the suffer cycle is where you're just in resistance. It's where you're in a negative emotion. It's where you're labeling maybe a whole lot of different emotions, such as maybe anger or sadness or guilt or frustration. You may be just labeling that as fear or I'm upset. But if you can get specific on the emotion, you now gain access to a very, very powerful level of detail about what you're actually experiencing, which means you can now do something about it. So I work with a lot of clients who, a lot of the time they say, well, what's up? They're going through a challenge and they'll say, oh, I'm afraid. A lot of the time it's not actually fear. What it is them in resistance to a particular emotion that they label as fear. For example, if you've just been given a redundancy, a lot of people might say, I'm afraid of being given a redundancy. Well, there is a resistance to, for example, the emotion of shame, right, embarrassment, right, these sorts of things. About, well, what are people going to say about me? What does this mean about my identity? Maybe it's sadness, maybe it's a sense of loss. So recognize that sometimes we label things as being fear when it's actually just a resistance to not wanting to feel another emotion that we just generalize as fear. So this is a really important distinction. The way to help you do this process is, as you're going through a crisis, journal. Now, journal, for those of you that are unfamiliar with the concept of journaling, go back and watch my previous episode on journaling, because it's going to give you a structure and a framework for how to journal. But very, very simply, you want to unpack your experience by saying, what am I experiencing? So in a crisis, just ask yourself, what am I experiencing? What am I feeling? And write. Journaling is for the purposes of purging the mind, for creating deeper levels of awareness and understanding of the self. So by journaling, you're actually purging your mind. It's like doing a mind dump, a brain dump, and getting it all out on paper. Now, once you've got it out on the page, you can evaluate it. You can assess, what are you feeling? What are you experiencing? It's like taking a blood test. It's like sampling what's just taking place inside your mind. So that journaling process is very, very powerful. And then once you've written your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions all down on paper, you can unpack it. You can go, oh, that's what it is. I'm actually not in fear. I'm actually embarrassed, or I'm actually sad. So it depends on the experience. It depends on how you do this process, but you'll start to get greater clarity as you go through the journaling process. The next thing to realize is that every single crisis eventually passes. Every crisis will pass. Every emotional experience, doesn't matter the severity, doesn't matter whether someone's died, whether you've broken up with a partner, doesn't matter whether there's an injury, whether someone's been diagnosed as being terminally ill. Every single experience eventually passes. That's the ultimate truth of everything in this life, is everything will always pass. And we need to have patience for sometimes allowing that time to pass. Being patient in the moment, knowing that, sometimes we've got to go through some hard times to arrive at the good times. And it's knowing that everything is eventually going to pass, that sometimes it's just enough presence, is just enough awareness for us to be able to go, okay, I'll be able to handle this. I know it's going to get better. And sometimes it's challenging. Sometimes it's difficult. And we need every advantage in these moments of crises in order to be able to manage ourselves. So recognize that everything is going to pass. Just like the weather, right? When it starts raining, when the thunderclouds come in, it's going to rain for a bit, but eventually the weather is going to move on. It's the same with your emotional world. It's the same with any crisis. It will eventually move on. And those thunderclouds will eventually turn to blue sky. That crisis will eventually turn into an opportunity, and a new opportunity to grow, to expand, and become a more whole and complete version of you. So realize that every crisis is actually contributing to your expansion. It's happening through you, it's happening for you, it's happening for your expansion. So recognize that within all adversity contains within it the seeds of us expanding into the equal and opposite nature of that adversity. For example, if you lose your job, recognize that there is an even better, higher paying, more aligned job that's waiting for you just coming up around the corner. If you break up with a partner, recognize, great, there's another partner out there that's even more compatible, more aligned, and someone that's going to love you even more, and you're going to love them even more. Realize that if you've got a disease, right, your body is giving you information about how to heal that, about what to place your attention on, and then once you heal that, once you move through that, there's a higher level of health, and there's a more vital state of being that's now waiting for you in your future once you resolve that internal dis-ease that's showing up as an external dis-ease. So there's a lot of wisdom here in every part of our experience, in recognizing that there is nothing to resist. There is nothing to resist in life. Whatever we resist is going to persist. Every experience that's happening in life, it's happening for purposes greater than you could ever have awareness of. Like, this life isn't some kind of dress rehearsal. This isn't some kind of mistake. This whole experience, energetically, whether you want to call it the universe, quantum physics, God, life, it's all unfolding, and there is infinite intelligence behind this whole system. So recognize that even though we can't identify it, or sometimes it might be difficult to identify the infiniteness, the awe, the wonder, the beauty in that experience, it's always there, but it's just that sometimes we fail to see it. Sometimes the lens that we're viewing it through at that moment in time distorts our reality, and we don't see the beauty, we don't see the bliss, we don't see the grand nature of the purpose of the universe unfolding in that moment. And that's part of the mystery of this life, this part of being a human, is sometimes it's difficult to see that. Afterwards, when we look back on it, that's when it's usually easy to see it. So realize after a crisis is past, you will be able to look back on it with gratitude, with a sense of presence and a sense of, okay, that happened and I grew from it. It happened for a purpose. And sometimes we're not aware of that purpose, sometimes we are. So realize that a crisis is never as bad as what we think. A crisis is never as bad as what we think. Generally, in that moment, when we're in a low mood, when we're in a heightened emotional state of suffering, our perception is going to be distorted. Our perception of reality is going to be so distorted that we're going to think the worst case is probably going to happen. We're potentially going to predict, again, coming back to the example of if you lose a job, or what if I never get a job again? What if I lose my house? What if my partner breaks up with me? What if? When you're in that low mood, your prediction about life, your sense of possibility, your presence, it gets diminished. And so you can't possibly operate on the highest level of consciousness. So now the possibilities for your life are diminished. Your sense of what's going to happen is going to be minimized. Your sense of what you can create, what you can move beyond, your level of resilience, it's all going to be diminished in that moment. And it's because of your emotional state. It's because of your energy, your vibration, your frequency has become so low that you now are limited in the infinite possibilities that are now available as a result of this opportunity that's now unfolding. So we just got to recognize that, okay, if I'm going through a crisis and my mood is low, well, I'm going to be hallucinating all sorts of negative stuff. I'm going to be predicting the worst case scenario. I'm probably going to be thinking all sorts of negative stuff that is in no way, shape or form got any likelihood of even coming true in some cases. And so it's, again, starting to discern and starting to have the awareness of the hallucinations that are taking place. The last element I want to talk about here in handling a crisis is seeking help. I would say that seeking help is probably the most important part here. If you're going through a crisis, you don't have to handle it alone. Yes, if you handle it alone, you'll eventually move through it and you'll grow and you'll expand and you'll become a more competent professional human being. But at the same time, you also don't have to go through it alone. There's someone else who's already been through that crisis who doesn't even call it a crisis. They call it their job. They call it their job. They've done it so many times that it just becomes a normal part of life. So just start to recognize that if you need help, if you're in a moment of your life where you're struggling, where you don't know how to handle it, call in an expert. Call in someone who's handled this so many times before that it's just second nature to them. They don't call it a crisis, they just call it their job. It's just what I do. So recognize that if you are in a crisis and you don't know how to handle it, it's just because you don't understand how to handle it. You just haven't been through it to that capacity before. And there is someone out there that can help you. And I recommend obviously reaching out to someone that you trust, like a friend, someone who's close to you, someone who can give you an alternative perspective, someone who can give you a balanced viewpoint to help correct some of the negative, abstract, hallucinatory, if that's a word, hallucinatory, illusory, imaginary thoughts. Recognize that there's someone out there who can give you a more balanced perspective. And then once you have a conversation, you can start to sift through the gold. You can start to sift through what are the parts of this experience that are actually valid, that are useful, that are helpful, and what are the parts that are just you hallucinating negatively on things that are just have no relevance or have absolutely no truth to them whatsoever. A coach is a great person to speak to. A life coach, a transformational coach, someone who is equipped with the tools and strategies of understanding human behavior, and someone who's got the ability to hold space for someone in their darkest hour. So recognize you don't have to go through any crisis on your own. There's plenty of help out there, whether it be a counselor, a coach, therapist, someone who can hold space for you. That's a really powerful and it's a really special experience to know that you've got someone in your life that you can reach out to. And if you don't feel like you've got someone in your life you can reach out to that can hold space for you like that, well, probably a good time to ask yourself, who could you reach out to? Who could you develop a relationship with such that you know in the event of a crisis, you know you could actually turn to someone? Because we're all going to go through a crisis at some point in our life, and why not be prepared? Why not have a support network of people around us that we know we can actually lean on and communicate with and be supported by? I would suggest that's a really powerful, very clever, very intelligent thing to prepare for, would be making sure you've got people in your network, someone that you know that you can trust to reach out to in the event that something like a crisis goes down in your life. So they're some of the tools and the ways of thinking that I've been recommending clients manage themselves and handle their life this week in particular. And if you are going through a crisis right now, if you are going through some challenges, if you are going through a time in your life that's unfamiliar, that's uncertain, where you're breaking into new territory, you're going through completely different, unusual, strange, challenging experiences, just recognize that this is life, this is the gym of life, it's contributing to your expansion, it's going to help you evolve. And on the back end of this, after you've been through it, well, yeah, you're going to be stronger, more resilient, and more equipped to handle that again next time. And you probably might not call it a crisis next time, you just call it life. So I trust that helps. I trust that's added some strategies to your life and how you can manage and mitigate some of these challenges that are going to happen in your life. And when it does happen, you'll know what to do. You'll know how to structure yourself, how to approach this, how to keep yourself grounded, how do you stay present, and how do you start to sift through some of that information such that you can extract the gold, you can throw away the rocks and the dirt, and you can keep the gold. So yeah, I trust that was a useful episode for you guys. Thank you, Alison. Thanks, Charmaine. Thanks for tuning in, guys. That's the end of tonight's episode on how to deal with a crisis. So I look forward to seeing you guys again next week for Transformation Tuesday. For those of you that haven't already jumped on my Instagram account, my Instagram tag is Chris Jackson Coaching for those that are on Instagram. And I look forward to seeing you guys again soon. Also, YouTube, check out Chris Jackson Coaching on YouTube, and also the podcast on iTunes as well, Transformation Tuesday. We're also on Spotify as well. So for those of you that want to re-listen to these episodes in the way, shape or form that resonates with you, check out all of those links. And for those that are looking at my upcoming training courses, visit chrisjacksoncoaching.com and you'll see we've got the next version of Project Limitless starting up in a couple of months soon. So for those that resonate with taking your personal development a level deeper, for those that are wanting to take all of these concepts and principles and integrate them at a far deeper, more masterful level, then you guys are going to love Project Limitless. So thanks for tuning in, guys. As always, lots of love. I look forward to speaking to you again next week. Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, Charmaine. See you guys. Bye for now.